I was 10 when I first heard my mother say it. Dreams don't pay, Eliza. She said it while folding laundry, her voice flat, like she was stating the weather. I was sketching dresses in my math notebook, lines of color weaving through the margins where equations were supposed to be. She didn't even look up. Dreams are for girls who can afford to fail, she added, tucking a towel into a neat stack. And you, my dear, cannot. That sentence stitched itself into me so tightly that for years, I couldn't tell where her warning ended and my fear began. Back then, our little apartment in Columbus always smelled like detergent and compromise. Dad worked double shifts at the warehouse, and Mom ran a home-based stitching service for neighbors who wanted custom but paid cheap. The hum of her sewing machine was the soundtrack of my childhood. Every night, I watched her bend over fabric for someone else's dress, her fingers quick and precise, creating beauty she'd never wear. I used to imagine showing her one of my designs, something luminous, something that breathed, but every time I opened my mouth, she'd remind me to focus on practical things. Numbers, degrees, the world doesn't care how beautiful your sketches are, Eliza, she'd say. Bills don't admire art. By high school, I learned how to hide my dreams in plain sight. I joined the science club, got top grades, smiled when relatives said I was the responsible daughter. But at night, I'd sit on the floor sketching by flashlight, whispering color into existence. The real turning point came during my senior year. My art teacher, Mrs. Flores, entered one of my designs into a state competition without telling me. When I won third place, she hugged me, crying harder than my own family did. "You have something rare," she told me. "Don't bury it to please people who stopped dreaming long ago." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But that night, when I came home waving the certificate, Mom didn't even glance at it. She just said, "Nice. Now, can you start applying for accounting programs?" So, I did. For 4 years, I studied business administration like my life depended on it. Maybe it did. Tuition wasn't cheap, and Dad's back gave out the year I started college. I worked at a campus coffee shop, saving tips to buy sketchbooks I pretended not to own. My classmates planned internships. I planned designs no one would see. After graduation, I landed a job at a corporate firm. Gray walls, gray suits, gray lives. Everyone wore ambition like perfume, strong enough to hide exhaustion. I told myself I was grateful. Good salary, health insurance, stability, everything my mother wanted for me. But every time I entered that office, I felt smaller, like I'd traded oxygen for approval. One rainy Thursday, I was asked to design a PowerPoint for a client pitch. Just layout, nothing special. But I spent hours aligning colors, fonts, and visuals until it looked like a magazine spread. When my boss saw it, she blinked. "You have an eye for this stuff," she said. Ever considered design? The question hit like lightning. No one had asked me that in years. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at my old sketches, the same ones I'd drawn in secret back home. I pulled out a dusty sewing machine I'd bought secondhand and started stitching. Not for money, not for anyone's approval, just to remember what it felt like to create something that was mine. By sunrise, there was a half-finished linen top on the table and tears on my cheeks. I called in sick, spent the day sewing, then another, then another. For the first time in years, my heart didn't feel like it was negotiating survival. 2 weeks later, I built a tiny Instagram page, Eliza Makes. I didn't tell Mom. I didn't tell anyone. I just started posting my pieces, clean designs, modern lines, stitched by hand in my one-bedroom apartment. The first post got 8 likes, then 30, then 100. Within 3 months, a small eco-boutique from Chicago messaged me. "Would you be open to a collaboration?" I read it 6 times before replying, hands shaking. The first order, 12 handmade tops. Payment upfront, enough to cover a month's rent. I nearly cried on the kitchen floor. When I told Mom, she didn't share my joy. She frowned over the phone. "So you're quitting your real job to chase some hobby?" "It's not a hobby, Mom. It's a start." "Start of what?" "Starving." Her words hit like tiny blades, sharp, familiar, and impossible to dodge. I hung up that night with a stomach full of guilt and a heart full of quiet defiance. I worked after office hours, stitching until my fingers ached, packaging pieces at 2 a.m., shipping them at dawn. Orders grew. So did my exhaustion. But for the first time, every drop of sweat felt like it belonged to me. 6 months later, the boutique renewed the contract. I quit the corporate job the next day. The call with Mom didn't go well. Eliza, you can't be serious, she said. Do you know how many people would kill for a stable salary? Yes, I said softly. I was one of them, until I realized stability isn't the same as purpose. She went quiet, then sighed. Dreams don't pay, sweetheart. You'll see. I smiled through tears. Maybe not yet, Mom, but I'm betting on myself now. She hung up without replying. That night, I stood by my window, looking at the city lights, blinking like possibilities. I felt the same mix of fear and thrill I did when I first touched a blank fabric, unsure, but alive. 3 months later, I received my first international order, then a feature in a small digital magazine, then a bulk order for a summer collection. I worked 18-hour days, surviving on caffeine and adrenaline, but when the payment hit my account, I just stared at the screen in disbelief. The numbers, more than I'd ever earned in corporate life. I wanted to call Mom immediately, to tell her, to prove her wrong, but something stopped me. Maybe I wanted her belief, not her apology. Maybe I knew she wouldn't understand yet. Instead, I wrote her a letter. I told her I was doing well, that my business was growing, and that I finally felt at peace. I ended it with a line that surprised even me. I learned this from you, how to work hard with your hands. I'm just finally doing it for myself. Weeks passed with no response. Then, one evening, as I was preparing a new shipment, my phone rang. Dad's number. Eliza, he said, voice rough. Your mom's been bragging about you to the neighbors. Says her daughter's designs are in some magazine. I froze, laughter and tears tangling in my throat. She said that, he chuckled. Don't let her fool you. She's proud, just doesn't know how to say it. When I hung up, I realized something. Sometimes proving people wrong isn't about their apology. It's about finally living the truth. They were too scared to chase. That was the first night I didn't cry while working. I stitched under the soft hum of the machine, the rhythm matching my heartbeat. Outside, rain tapped the window like a slow applause. Inside, for the first time, I felt the sound of freedom. A year later, everything looked different except my hands. They still carried faint calluses, proof that I'd built something from nothing. My brand, Eliza Makes, had grown beyond my imagination. We shipped to 6 countries, partnered with 2 eco-retailers, and had a small team working in a sunlit studio I rented downtown. Every corner of that space whispered what my mother once denied me, that dreams, when worked for, do pay. Still, she hadn't said it herself. When I visited home that winter, the air in Columbus was sharp with frost. Mom met me at the door, wiping her hands on her apron like she wasn't expecting me even though I'd texted twice. You didn't have to come, she said, eyes darting to the gift bag in my hand. I wanted to, I replied, stepping into the familiar scent of detergent and simmering soup. It's been a while. The apartment hadn't changed much. Same beige curtains, same hum of her sewing machine in the corner. I set the gift bag on the table. Inside, a cream cardigan made from my new organic line. I made this, I said, for you. She took it out carefully, fingertips grazing the fabric. It's nice, she murmured, inspecting the stitches like a critic, not a mother. Looks expensive. It is, I said, half smiling. A few $100s. Her eyebrows shot up. For this, for the craftsmanship, I said softly, and for believing art has value. She didn't answer, but she folded it neatly, just once, the way she used to fold my baby clothes. For her, that was a conversation. At dinner, Dad filled the silence with talk about neighbors and football. Mom served food, listened, said little. When I told them I'd been invited to a fashion event in New York, she finally looked up. You're still doing all this on your own. I have a team now, 5 women, local seamstresses. She hesitated, spoon hovering midair. You're paying them properly. Of course, I said, they're the backbone of my brand. For a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes, respect, maybe even admiration, but it vanished before it could settle. Well, she said quietly, as long as you're not wasting money. That night, I slept in my childhood room, surrounded by faded posters and the faint smell of fabric starch. Lying there, I realized how much space I'd given her doubt in my life. It used to feel like truth. Now it just felt small. When I left the next morning, she handed me a paper bag of homemade cookies, the kind she used to bake when Dad worked night shifts. For the road, she said. Her tone was awkward, but her eyes lingered. Maybe that was her way of saying what words couldn't. 3 months later, I found out that the New York event would feature a keynote speaker, someone who built her empire from her mother's kitchen. It hit too close to home to ignore. When my turn came to speak on the panel, I looked out at the sea of faces and said, I come from a family where dreams were considered a luxury, but sometimes, the things we call impractical are what save us. After the event, a journalist approached me for an interview. The next morning, my story was online, from rejection to runway. The woman who stitched her way to success. The headline trended. Orders doubled overnight. My inbox exploded. And then, one message stopped me cold. It was from Mom. She'd shared the article on Facebook. Her caption read, "Proud of my daughter Eliza, who built her dream with her own hands." I reread it 10 times, tears blurring the screen. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even fully hers. Dad probably helped her post it, but it was something. When I called her, she picked up on the first ring. "You're famous now," she said with forced casualness. "I'm not famous," I laughed. "Just doing what I love." "You always did have stubbornness from your father," she said. "Maybe that's what it takes." For a few seconds, silence hung between you, a soft, unfamiliar silence, not heavy anymore. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "I was scared for you, Eliza, scared the world would break you the way it broke me." My throat tightened. "It didn't," I said gently. "You made me strong enough that it couldn't." After we hung up, I stood by the studio window, watching the late afternoon light fall across the work tables. My team was laughing, threads and fabrics scattered like confetti. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was proving anything to anyone. I was simply being. Weeks turned into months, and with success came recognition, local TV, podcasts, brand collaborations. But the best moment came quietly one Saturday when Mom visited the studio for the first time. She ran her hands across the fabric bolts, touching them the way she used to touch her sewing projects. "So this is where it happens," she said softly. "Yeah," I replied. "Everything starts here." She looked around the bright room, at the women's sewing, the hum of machines, the rhythm of creation. "They remind me of myself," she said, "back when I loved making things." "You still can," I offered. "We're launching a mentoring program next month for local women who want to stitch professionally. You'd be perfect for it." She laughed nervously. "I'm too old for that." "Dreams don't age, Mom," I said. "You taught me that's just not in the way you meant to." Her eyes glistened, but she nodded, pretending to be busy examining thread spools. When she left that evening, she turned back at the door. "Eliza," she said, voice trembling, "you were right. Dreams do pay, sometimes not in money but in peace." I smiled. "They pay in both now." She laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in years, and that moment felt bigger than any magazine feature or brand deal. Now, 2 years later, I still think about that sentence she once said. Dreams don't pay. I keep it framed in my office, embroidered in silver thread above my desk, not as a wound, but as a reminder of how far I've come. Every time I look at it, I remember the nights I stitched through doubt, the mornings I mailed orders with shaking hands, the voice in my head that said, "Prove it to yourself, not to her," and every payday, when I sign salaries for the women working under me, I smile at the irony. The thing she feared would starve me now feeds others. Sometimes I still visit home. We sit together, sewing, side by side, not as mother and daughter locked in battle, but as two women finally learning each other's language. She still corrects my stitches sometimes, out of habit. I let her. That's our peace treaty. Last week, she handed me an old sketchbook I thought she'd thrown away. My first one, filled with uneven lines and childish designs. "Found it in the attic," she said. "You should keep it. Looks like where everything started." I flipped through the pages, my old drawings still raw with hunger. At the back, she'd written something I'd never seen before. Faint pencil marks under my last sketch. "Maybe one day, your dreams will teach me something too." I looked up, and she just smiled. No explanation, no apology, just quiet understanding. That night, back at my apartment, I placed the sketchbook beside the framed quote. Two opposing sentences from the same woman. "Dreams don't pay, and your dreams taught me something." One was fear, the other was growth, and between them stood me proof that sometimes love hides behind the harshest words, waiting for you to grow brave enough to rewrite them, because maybe dreams don't pay at first, but when they finally do, they pay in more than money. They pay in becoming the person you were always meant to be.